want to talk about another individual in the scripture who was proven faithful in that dark night of testing when the promise of the Lord seemed to be so far away and not working in her life, and that is Mary of Bethany. Her story is found in a couple of places in the New Testament. First of all, in Luke chapter 10, where we're introduced to Mary and her sister Martha. And Jesus and the disciples are welcomed into their home at the end of Luke chapter 10. They come in for a time of refreshment and visiting. And Martha, Mary's older sister, is busily preparing food and serving Jesus. She is busy serving Jesus. But when Jesus comes into the house, Mary leaves her activity and comes and sits at the feet of Jesus to hear his word. Now Martha, who's the consummate servant, she is the task-oriented believer. She believes that her whole identity is about serving Jesus, when in the heart of Jesus, what he was after in that situation was intimate friendship and communion. And so Martha comes to Jesus and she's upset about the situation. She says, "Don't you care? Don't you care that Mary has left me to serve alone?" And her frustration at the situation causes her to question Jesus' caring heart. And Jesus looks at her and responds and says, "Oh, Martha, Martha, bless your heart." I can just hear him. "Bless your heart, Martha. I love you so much, but you are worried and distracted about so many things." What was she distracted with? Serving Jesus. She was busily serving Jesus. My friend Graham Cook says it this way: Martha was busy making sandwiches that Jesus never ordered. Mary, on the other hand, and Jesus says it this way, Mary has chosen the better part. And her better part was to come and sit at Jesus' feet and hear his word. Jesus called it the one necessary thing that would not be taken away from her. That's an important statement coming from the mouth of Jesus. There is one necessary thing, sitting at his feet, hearing his word. Why is that so important? Well, we know that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Rhema word of the Lord, that word that is spoken in the moment of intimacy. It's that instantaneous word that comes in the place of communion with Jesus, sitting at his feet, listening to him. And we know that faith comes out of that, and that according to Hebrews 11, without faith it's impossible to please God. The righteous man lives by his faith. And so it's the life that we are called to is dependent upon that flow of intimate communion with Jesus, his heart communicating with our heart by his Rhema word. And so Mary has chosen the better part. She's understanding that life itself flows out of that kind of intimate communion with her King. Her situation is put to the test in another place in the New Testament. It's John chapter 11, where we discover that Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus are in a situation. Lazarus has gotten sick, and he's deadly sick. And so they send word to Jesus saying, "Jesus, our brother Lazarus, the one you love, is sick." And they really don't even ask Jesus to come. They just sort of assume that he will come. He loves them. He's their friend, and they've seen his activity. Surely he will come and heal Lazarus. As a matter of fact, Jesus gives the word to the servant, and he says, "Go tell them this sickness will not end in death, but for the glory of God." Now that's a good word. That's a good word. And the servant goes back with great joy and great comfort and gives the word to Mary and Martha, and their hearts are settled. They have a promise from Jesus that this will not end in death, but will end in the glory of God. And their minds can only conceive of it in one way, that Jesus will come and heal Lazarus, and everybody will be happy. And so the situation takes a very dark turn in verse 5 of John chapter 11. It says this: "Now Jesus loved Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus, so when he heard that he was sick." Now, if I'm writing the story, maybe if you're writing the story, the next phrase in the story would be, "So when he heard that he was sick, he got up and went and healed Lazarus as quickly as he could, lest they would be uncomfortable and distressed in the situation." But that's not what it says. What it says is this: Jesus loved Mary and Martha and their brother Lazarus, so when he heard that he was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. There's a cause and effect thing going on here. Jesus loved Mary and Martha, there's the cause, so, here's the effect, when he heard that he was sick, he purposely delayed his coming for maximum glory, but in the short term, there would be maximum stress. Put yourself in Mary and Martha's position on the other end of that message. They're fully expecting Jesus to show up. They have no place in their mind where they're thinking death and resurrection, Lazarus being raised from the dead. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking Jesus is coming to heal him. And Jesus purposefully stays away, does not communicate what he's doing. He leaves them in that dark place to wrestle with faith in a dark night when his presence is not close. Finally, after several days, they make the journey. Jesus, already knowing what he's going to do, he's told his disciples that Lazarus has died and he's going to raise him up. But I can imagine now, Jesus comes into Bethany and it's already 4 days after the funeral. Imagine what Mary and Martha have gone through. They've waited. They had this promise from God. The Lord will come. He'll come. But he delays, and Lazarus gets sicker and sicker, and finally he dies, and they bury him, and he's been in the tomb for 4 days. Might as well have been 4 months or 40 years because of the anguish and the stress that's going on in their hearts. What happened? Where was he? And Jesus comes to the edge of town, and Martha greets him and says, "Lord, if you had just been here, my brother would not have died." And Jesus asks a very pointed question of Martha. He says, "Martha, do you believe that your brother will rise again?" And Martha gives him a good, theological, doctrinally accurate answer. "Yes, Lord, I believe that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day." It's theologically correct, but there's no life in it. Jesus looks at her and he says to her, "Martha, I'm the resurrection. I am the resurrection." She understood her doctrine, but she didn't recognize that her theology had come to life in the man that was standing in front of her. She knew her doctrine, but she didn't know him. There was no light of faith that was burning in her heart that would ignite Jesus' heart to do the miracle that he came to do. And so he turned away from her without being moved by her situation. And he asks for his friend. Martha goes running and finds Mary and says, "The teacher is here and he's asking for you." Now that's an interesting situation. Jesus is coming into town to do perhaps the second most amazing miracle in the New Testament after his own resurrection. And he asks for Mary to come and be with him. He's looking for the partnership of the one in whose heart burns that light of faith. And he wants to test her. She's been through a season, a 4 to 6 to 8 day season of testing where the word of the Lord tested her. It's the same thing as Joseph in Psalm 105. Until the word came to pass, the word of the Lord tested her. And she's in that house wondering what's going on. I call it waging the violent war of chosen trust in a God who made a promise, but who seems in the moment to be silent and distant. And Jesus comes to her, and she comes and she prays the same prayer that Martha prayed. "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." And Jesus sees her. It says he sees her weeping, and he sees her friends weeping, and his own spirit is stirred. There was something in Mary's statement, a light of faith, an ignition of faith that stirred the heart of Jesus that was absent in Martha's question because she had not received that word that would birth faith in her heart. Mary's statement stirs him. Her emotions stir him, and he goes to the tomb and raises Lazarus from the dead. The purpose of God in that situation was not the preservation of the comfort zone of his friends, but the maximum glory that would come when a confused, wondering believer would actually trust Jesus in the midst of a dark night. My prayer is that as The Lord invites you and me into those kinds of situations that we too will find the grace to stand. It's all rooted in sitting at his feet and hearing his word, coming to him, communing with Jesus, letting that Rhema word of the Lord ignite our hearts with faith so that when the word is tested in the dark night season, we can stand in trust and love, even as Mary did, even as Abraham and Joseph did, even as Jesus did. May the Lord bless you.